Good morning. I don't know if you felt how I felt about driving up. I didn't come a very long way. I know many of you did. But what an amazing state to live in, Massachusetts, especially on this crisp October morning, driving up the highway, watching the foliage, people bustling to work. I want to welcome you today to a very important day. My name is Laurie Cadigan, and I'm the president of the Massachusetts Association of Realtors for this year. My president-elect is here in the audience, and on behalf of the realtors in the state, on behalf of the MassHousing and the National Association of Realtors, I welcome you to this very important symposium, The Future of Homeownership in Massachusetts. As a realtor and an owner of a real estate company, I can tell you from firsthand experience it's not an easy thing to buy a home in Massachusetts anymore. Between the availability of affordable starter homes or affordable move-up homes, to our 351 cities and towns and their 351 different zoning regulations, to assessing, financing landmines these days, and the high level of foreclosures, it's just no cakewalk. The obstacles aren't bad enough, but now we question whether homeownership is really the right thing to do. You're here because either personally or professionally or both, homeownership matters to you. And I'm hoping that today we can provide some answers and some action items and some solutions about what we can all do to improve the picture of homeownership in Massachusetts. We have invited the most knowledgeable experts on housing, not only from Massachusetts, but from all over the country. I'd like to introduce you to Peter Milewski. He's the Director of Mortgage Insurance Fund from MassHousing. Peter will act as our Master of Ceremonies for the day, and he'll also be the first panel moderator. Peter is serving as the Director of the Mortgage Insurance Fund for MassHousing, has been there for 12 years. He also serves as the manager of the Homeownership Business Development Department as well. He's been employed in senior management positions in the mortgage lending and mortgage industry. It feels to me like forever, but I guess it's only been 44 years. He's a past president of the Massachusetts Mortgage Bankers Association, where he served on that board for 12 years and was the recipient of not only the Distinguished Service Award there, but the Lifetime Achievement Award. Before I allow Peter to take over the podium, I want to remind you, for those of you who tweet, that today's hashtag is FHOMA. And thank you so much for attending. I know that you'll get a lot out of the day, not only up from the podium, but networking with each other. Peter, welcome to the podium.
The first panel was a real effort, because whenever you try to get three distinguished mayors any place at the same time, it could be a challenge. Fortunately, Mayor Joseph O'Brien of our host city is with us. We are waiting to see Scott Lang, who has let us know that he is in traffic and on his way. He will be here. But I also heard from Mayor Dominic Sarno late Friday. I felt like Wolf Blitzer, or one of the guys on CNN, I was getting breaking news from him that he had just gotten word that this morning there was a protest demonstration planned for the city of Springfield for the Occupy Wall Street group, and that he, depending upon the complexity and the size of the crowd, may have to arrive late or not at all. So this is going to be an interesting panel if we only have one panelist, but I do have assurances that Scott is on his way. Mayor Joseph O'Brien is a native son of the city of Worcester. He is serving his first term as mayor of the Central City, a graduate of Doherty Memorial High School here. He went on to earn his bachelor's degree in urban studies from Fordham University, as well as a master's in public administration from Harvard University. After college, his community activism began with time spent as a community organizer promoting public safety in one of the toughest neighborhoods in the Bronx in the city of New York. In 1994, he found and then led a free summer program for the youth here in Worcester at Columbus Park that served hundreds of youngsters from the neighborhood and from the Worcester Housing Authority complex at Lakeside. In addition to many local and regional public service positions he's held, Mayor O'Brien has also served as the campaign manager for our now Lieutenant Governor Tim Murray, and later as the district director for Congressman James McGovern. He is passionate about his city and is heavily involved in the city's growth and renaissance. And I've been involved in a lot of the major cities in our By Cities programs here in Massachusetts, and I can honestly tell you that I have never been involved with three more committed cities than Bedford, Springfield, and Worcester in terms of neighborhoods, stabilizing neighborhoods, and growing neighborhoods. The work that Mayor O'Brien and his staff and the people who work for the city have done has been truly extraordinary. So I want to welcome Mayor O'Brien to the dais and ask you to have a seat and be comfortable.
We're not quite used to this mic setup here, so there you go. All right, we're all set to go.
Okay. What I'd like to do is, first of all, tell you how frequently visiting the city of Worcester, I marvel at the renaissance that the city has been able to go through during these very challenging economic times. And I'd like for you, first of all, with some initial remarks, to tell everybody what you feel is going on in the city and the opportunities, the challenges, the issues that you're dealing with, and give us kind of an overview of what's going on here in Worcester.
Absolutely. It's a little unusual, kind of, sitting in a comfy chair in kind of in front of a crowd is an unusual thing for a mayor. So forgive me. I want to first of all thank MassHousing and the MassHousing Realtors for putting this together and for being here in our city. Forgive me as a mayor and obviously the host mayor here in the city of Worcester. You have to struggle through my 2-minute infomercial on the city of Worcester. So I apologize in advance, but I always feel I need to tell our story a little bit better because most folks don't know a great deal about my city and about the great things that are happening. I love to say that the city of Worcester is a city with a very rich history and a bright future. We became a town in 1721, a city in 1847. We make a point, actually, the American Revolution began here. I know that's what you learned in your textbooks, right? The American Revolution began in Worcester. But actually, what happened here, just actually 2 blocks over on Main Street, several months in advance of Lexington conquered, the local farmers and merchants rose up and drove the British out of town, but it was a nonviolent effort, so we didn't quite make the history books the same way those folks in Lexington conquered did. So forgive me for taking advantage of that. But we then kind of became a center for the abolitionist movement. Some of the great abolitionists here in the nation were here. Thomas Wentworth Higgins, one of the founders of the Atlantic Monthly magazine, kind of one of the first kind of leading intellectual voices was in the city, as well as the great suffragette movement. The first national women's rights convention happened here in Worcester. The one in Seneca Falls was a regional one, led by folks like Abby Kelly Foster and Lucy Stone. And then we all like to say that the Industrial Revolution kind of begins in Lowell and Lawrence. Anyone here from Lowell and Lawrence? But we know that it really begins in the Blackstone Valley. And actually, we have a National Heritage Corridor that runs from here all the way down to Warwick and onto the area of the Narragansett Bay, which is really where the Industrial Revolution begins in the early mills. The city, my city here, grew significantly up through the Second World War. And then, like many other cities, such as New Bedford, one of the gateway cities, saw a significant decline after the Second World War. We've kind of reinvented ourselves here in our community, making major investments in areas of healthcare, biotechnology, and life sciences, and higher education. We have more than 30,000 college students here, a dozen colleges and universities in Worcester and the surrounding towns. We've got a very large biotechnology park that spun out from UMass Medical School. And then we have our life science park that is part of Worcester Polytech Institute, which is now growing significantly. And I'd like to kind of talk to that story a little bit because the city is really, I think, positioned well and growing at a very rapid pace. We're the second largest community in New England now, according to census data. We used to arm wrestle with Providence and the mayor down there about who was bigger, but it's official after 2010. And I bring that up then to segue into the issue of housing, because as we've grown, which is an important thing, an exciting thing, we've also become poor, like many other gateway cities across the Commonwealth. And as you probably, or some of you probably saw, there was a great story in the Boston Globe about some of that migration of the middle class out of cities like the Worcesters and Fall Rivers and Providences, Manchesters, a challenge to hold those middle-class families in your city. And we've struggled with that even as we've gotten bigger and grown. The second point about that immigration, we have this great diversity in our city. We have more than 100 languages spoken in our schools, almost 100 countries of origin for kids in our public schools. And I bring up that immigration story because housing has always been the kind of gateway to prosperity for immigrant families and working families. As you drive into my city and you drive down 290 and you look off to the right away from downtown, you see our great three-deckers, the three-family homes, wood three-family homes that really became a real income opportunities for working families, immigrant families who were able to buy those homes, even with fairly modest means. They often would have many generations of their family living in those homes, benefiting from the rental income in those houses as well, and really provided real opportunities then as they move forward in their careers to borrow against those, send kids to college, or to use those to start a business or to take other kind of steps forward and move from that multifamily environment to a single-family environment. So that was kind of part of the pathway that we've had in our city towards prosperity, and housing's been a critical component of that. Wages have never been, we haven't had the great prosperity that many other cities have, but we've had this wealth of very affordable housing that's been an entry point for so many folks into the middle class. And so the challenge we face, as many other communities face, especially our gateway cities here in the Commonwealth, is that the opportunities for home ownership are really under some challenges. And I just want to talk a little bit about kind of our experience here over the last decade and tell you a little bit of experience about the decline of home ownership and why that's critically important. I first ran for public office in 1998, and I unsuccessfully, but I spent a great deal of time going door to door in every neighborhood in the city. And then a decade later, when I ran for mayor in 2009, about 11 years later, I was amazed at the decline of number of folks who are actually homeowners in all parts of the city, not just in the poorer section of the city, but even in the middle-class section of the city, seeing this kind of real exodus of home ownership. And I've tried to get a better understanding about kind of what some of those dynamics were and why we have seen kind of a decline in home ownership in significant numbers. Certainly, we have, like many other communities, have seen kind of the rise and the kind of fall of home prices. Pretty remarkably, I use my house as a good example. My house in 1998 was evaluated at, assessed at $119,000. By 2006, it had risen to $247,000. So a 7.5-year period, more than doubled in assessments. And assessments, as you all know, in almost every city and town, lag behind the actual values, right? So we saw this dramatic kind of escalation in values. And then we've seen, for example, the average single-family home was $118,000 in 2000. That rose in 2005 to $260,000. So we saw, explosion of home ownership values. And then we've actually seen that come back down over the last 2 years, kind of dramatic declines. Today, our assessments, actually, we would make a case our assessments for the city are actually pretty close to market value now. We've kind of, that equation where historically, because they lag behind, we're actually feeling pretty confident in our assessments. We've gone through a fairly extensive reassessment process over the last 18 months. And the average single-family home now is assessed around $200,000, $199 and change, and three-family home is assessed at $204,000. Now, for me as a mayor, you would think that there's an upside to that. The upside, you would think then, well, the good news is that means more people are going to have opportunity to buy, right, to get back in. And I would make a case as a mayor that home ownership is critical for stability across all neighborhoods, whether that's middle-class neighborhoods or poor neighborhoods. I would make a case that should provide real opportunity, and that we really want to kind of encourage that. And I'll talk a little bit about how we've been doing that. I would also make a case that we're doing well. So I'm thinking there should be this real significant upsurge in purchasing over this last 18 months as I've come into office. Why? Because we still have very strong schools here. We've got a strong jobs market. Worcester was actually, believe it or not, the third strongest jobs market in the country, according to the Boston Business Journal last month. Third strongest country, Boston, Ogden, Utah, and Worcester. So we've seen kind of growing strength in our private sector, kind of lots of hiring happening, growth happening there. We've got strong schools. I would make a case we have a very safe community. We know there's a direct correlation between safety and real estate values and real estate purchases. Very safe community. We have a high quality of life here. And yet we haven't really seen that rise in purchasing. And I've struggled to try to understand kind of what those dynamics are. I'm not an expert. We have Miguel Rivera, who's our housing director, who used to run our Homeownership Center, is as part of our team. And he probably would be better to answer that question. But we clearly see there's been a couple things going on. One is the credit challenges have still been very significant. You still see many working families, many immigrant families historically who have been able to purchase those homes are struggling to buy homes. That's been number one. I think clearly have been a great challenge. The instability. One of the things I found in hearing stories from a lot of folks who had been homeowners who actually bought in that bubble period, in that middle 2000s period, who actually got over their heads, have kind of created a dynamic and then lost their homes, created a dynamic where there is fear, I think, amongst a lot of working and even lower middle class families that are saying, geez, I heard this story about this person at church or my neighbor or friend who bought a three-decker or bought a home and got over their head and lost everything and are now kind of trying to rebuild their lives. So there is this sense of fear, and I can't quantify that. I'm sorry, it's probably a good academic term for that. I have to ask my friends maybe from MassHousing could quantify that. But there's this real fear. So it's not only a credit issue, but I think there's a lot of folks, even though they feel that I got a job today, am I going to have a job tomorrow? I'm going to be able to kind of afford to kind of purchase this home and stay in it. And that's real because we did see kind of this, incredible period where credit was so easy for many families. I would meet these families of modest means in the middle 2000s who actually owned 2 or 3 homes. And you're saying, how in the world did you buy 3 homes? Then you would see them a couple of years later and they lost all 3 of those 3-deckers. And you'd say, so there's clearly a sense of fear. The other issue I think that is still continuing to kind of create a real drag is the challenge of foreclosures. We're 37th in the nation in foreclosures. That's a pretty tough statistic, 37th as of about 6 months ago. I haven't seen the most recent data, but that's a big number. And a very challenging number. We still have a significant number of short sales on the market that are kind of causing some challenges for private real estate transactions. And I think the other challenge is that now that many folks are stuck, so many people are underwater. Folks that we had many investors who came in here in the mid-2000s, had a lot of private folks who saw Worcester as a low-cost market where they could buy multifamily properties and then flip them in a fairly short period of time. They're now sitting on 3-deckers that are assessed, that they got mortgages or costs on of $250,000, $300,000, and yet the market is only they got them down to $200,000. So you have a lot of private folks who bought in that mid-period who can't unload those. So I think that's causing some challenges as well. We're kind of waiting that market out, hoping for an out. I mentioned, I'm sorry, and I jumped ahead and I shouldn't have. The foreclosure issue is still a real challenge. And now I want to talk a little bit about what we're trying to do here in the city of Worcester to address both those foreclosure challenges and to get more people back in their homes. The first part is that we have an aggressive anti-foreclosure effort. We have a very strong counseling component through our Homeownership Center, as many other folks around the nation do, cities do, funded by Neighborhood Works and by city, state, and federal monies to kind of keep people in homes. That's been kind of a top priority. We're spending a significant amount of our NSP allocation, federal NSP funds, working with our community development corporations to purchase foreclosed homes and actually put them back into rental stock. Now, the challenge, once again, is that historically our CDCs were generating properties, and we had a big emphasis over the last decade to kind of get folks into home ownership opportunities through our CDCs. But once again, because of the current challenges, that the fear, instability out there, many of those are becoming rental units, not home ownership units, which is a concern for most of us. And then we're also trying to work with receivers. We kind of an aggressive receiver program where we have folks who are going into foreclosure or neglecting their property. We have private receivers that come in, take over those properties, do the necessary repairs, and then bring them back online or go through the foreclosure process to recapture that investment. We also have a very aggressive program here in the city of Worcester called Buy Worcester Now, which is a kind of coordinated effort between realtors and bankers local bankers and some other kind of resources the city and other departments are putting together to try to get people back into that housing purchase market. It's been a very successful program, a good collaborative effort that Miguel and others are working on. And the last piece is that we're still trying to push more kind of market rate housing out there, as many folks here that many of the middle cities are trying to do. But we're still up against a real challenge that the market is not there yet for market rate housing the ways we'd like to see it. We still need to have subsidies from affordable units to move those forward. That being said, I am optimistic. I do think that we need better vehicles to help, especially this next generation of immigrants and working families, kind of get into home ownership opportunities. I know there is, I think, I would make a case, a somewhat kind of unfair characterization that a lot of the housing challenges that we had and the credit challenges and the nation's kind of financial challenges were because we had many irresponsible buyers who actually bought over their head in times when credit was made easy. I think that was part of the challenge, but I do believe that at the end of the day that those investments in home ownership, even with some of the high levels of foreclosure, I think are still fairly good ones. I think at the end of the day we still need to continue to find ways to get working families into home ownership opportunities. I think it's critical for the future, the stability of neighborhoods and cities like mine. So I would make a case that we need to continue to work with folks at MassHousing, through the state and federal government, to find more ways to get people into affordable home ownership opportunities. I think it's critically important for the future of our community. So I'll probably stop there. I don't know if that was too long.
No, that was... given the fact that Dominic and Scott haven't arrived yet, that you occupy the time perfectly. I think one of the things that I see going from city to city is each city has a very unique methodology or strategy that they apply. And one of the things that seems to differentiate Worcester a little bit from the others is a very engaged base of employers that the universities, the other large employers of the city are very engaged, and they were very engaged in the Buy Worcester Now program. Could you talk a little bit about how your office cultivated those relationships with major employers, how you got them to respond, and the kind of responses that you're seeing from them?
Yeah, I want to be careful not to take too much credit for some of the work done by our city manager and my predecessors. They'd probably give me a hard time. Buy Worcester Now actually kind of came into being prior to me coming in as mayor, but I can talk a little bit about some of the partnerships that we've had with our businesses, and especially with our colleges and universities. I think have been critical towards that. A couple things. I would make credit to our city manager and his team for working with multi-agencies, banks, and others to create the Buy Worcester Now program. Critical to that has been some local employers in our colleges and universities who created real incentives for folks to buy in their local communities. A good example of that is UMass Memorial Healthcare System, which is our largest employer. Employs more than 10,000 people, has our two large hospitals and a very large network of providers throughout the region. They've actually recognized that the area immediately around the hospital, a very challenged neighborhood, low income and very significant transition. I see our friends from the Eastside CDC are here. Dominic, who actually represents that area. They've created real financial incentives, both helping underwrite some of the actual development in the city, kind of providing cash assistance to help underwrite some of the development, but also provide incentives for employees and down payment assistance and other programs to assist their employees, especially those moderate wage employees, to kind of buy in their neighboring communities. And I think it's a smart strategy for them because it's both stabilizing kind of the periphery around the hospital and also providing opportunities for folks who are employees to kind of have access to affordable home ownership. Very similarly, Clark University has a great program which for its employees, both professors all the way down to the folks that work kind of cleaning the rooms and doing the very basic maintenance work, have opportunities to actually get down payment assistance and access low-cost loans in order to buy in the immediate area around Clark University. And I'd like to say that I think the work that's been done by our team, by the city manager and our housing team, has been about collective shared self-interest, right? Recognizing that we have institutions such as Clark University, and I probably should explain, Clark is in the main south section of Worcester, a very large university, but is surrounded by some challenged neighborhoods. And they made a very smart decision, I think, about a decade and a half ago, about 15 years ago. Instead of saying they were going to leave, as some universities did, leaving a difficult neighborhood and relocate, they made a decision to stabilize the neighborhood, partnering with our It's a community development corporation, the Maine South CDC, helping to underwrite and support efforts towards home ownership opportunities and the redevelopment of multifamily and single-family homes. The Gardner-Kilby-Hammond project was kind of led between Clark and the CDC. Was critical to that was home ownership component. Almost 80 units of home ownership, either single-family or detached, two families have been created that actually allowed Clark employees to come and live there, as well as neighborhood folks to come and live in those properties. And it's been good for both, right? Because it's helped to stabilize those neighborhoods. Once again, that having that core of homeowners is critical, has helped to stabilize the neighborhood around Clark. They also work with private folks as well. If you're an employee, you can either go through the CDC, but you can also go and purchase a home privately in a target area around the college where you can actually buy and actually stabilize. It helps to stabilize that neighborhood.
I think the remarkable thing that we see from these exercises is this new energy. I mean, so much about what goes on in the economy, so much of what goes on in our communities has to do with attitude, has to do with the mental framework with which you approach a problem. And I will give your city manager a tremendous amount of credit. Mike O'Brien is a
no relation.
Okay, but he's a great guy, and he embraced this idea with a tremendous amount of energy and enthusiasm, and did it in a very, very special way. But it was a collaborative energy. It was realtors working with nonprofits, working with local lenders, working with employers, working with retailers. We even had
Charter Communications and other folks actually provided kind of little additional things. So you got a discount on your cable, you got a little gift bag with different things, a subscription to the local newspaper for a year. You got all kinds of fun things as part of that. That's right.
So the people in this room have the ability to collaborate and work within your communities. And they don't have to be large communities, too. We've done some things with MassHousing with the northern Quabbin communities in the city of Gardner. So we've done a lot, but it was a lot of it was modeled on what Mike O'Brien and Christine Andrioli and their staff did here, and you to be commended.
Could I just make two quick points about that too, though, that I think critical to that and the success of that program, especially for more moderate and working class families who participate in that program, was this whole idea of home buyer counseling. In order to kind of access to both the city's down payment assistance, you had to actually go through a kind of a home buying counseling course. We've run those series of those, as many communities have across the country, through our Homeownership Center. And I think that's a critical component in that I think the city very strategically, especially in that short era where we had both the Obama tax credit plus some local funds we were able to put on the table, we were able to actually really entice people to go through fairly well thoughtful, strategic home buying training courses so that folks knew what they were getting into and kind of had a good tool set to kind of approach that. So it wasn't just about good gifts and other things. It was also real cash incentives that the city was putting on the table as you went through that program. We kind of created some good kind of model products that were folks able to access as far as kind of interest rates, but also we had real cash to help people put down the table to get a home. I use the example of, and actually I want to be really clear in case anyone works for the Ethics Commission, because I'm talking about my father-in-law, but he used this program. I was not in office at the time. But he used that program, was an example of a fairly modest person working on a middle-class income who was able to kind of go through the Homeownership Center program, kind of qualify both for a reasonable cost loan plus down payment assistance that after 25 years was able to move him into an affordable condominium. Was a really good example, at least for me, about the power of having really effective kind of home buying counseling to make sure also people make good decisions when they make that purchase.
It also leverages small dollars with large impact.
That's right.
One of the things that we deal with at MassHousing is a requirement that any first-time home buyer with 5% or less down have to go through home buyer counseling. There's a lot of resistance to that, and to be honest with you, among some of the real estate realtor community, because it's an additional barrier that occurs before someone has to buy a home. It adds some time and inconvenience to the process. But I want to pick up on what you said, Joe, is that what it's doing, it's better preparing people for successful home ownership, not just today, but in the long run. And what we're seeing today is that where 4 years ago or 5 years ago, everybody in a home buyer class had already signed a purchase and sales agreement, now it's just the opposite. We're seeing 90% of the people attending homebuyer classes are there before they buy a home, and they're being a lot more thoughtful and a lot more careful about the process.
Could you just make one more point on that, too, is that it's not always big dollar incentives that you need. You talk about, for example, the city of Worcester credit on average was around $3,000. Doesn't sound like a significant amount of money, but for many homeowners or folks, prospective homeowners, that was enough to kind of make them take that additional jump into home ownership. They were kind of on the edge. Certainly the Obama tax credit helped, but even before and after the tax credit that was from the Obama administration, clearly that $3,000 for it was enough for many people to make that entry point into home ownership. It was enough of an incentive to get them excited, to get them into that home buyer class, to get them thinking, hey, maybe I can do this. And like you're saying, getting people to the front end, not folks when they've already made a decision they're going to buy, they've got a purchase sale, and they're thinking, geez, now I got to go to that home buyer class so I can get a better price interest rate. Here, we're actually getting people on the front end, which I think is critically important. And having that small amount of cash on the table has been enough to draw folks in who maybe hadn't given it a complete thought and were able to really get educated and then make really good decisions, especially those who are buying multifamilies, two families or three families. So they did the right kind of calculations about how they could weather kind of getting through any kind of difficulties.
A very seasoned housing stock in Worcester, as you have in Springfield and New Bedford. What are some of the issues that you're struggling with in terms of keeping the neighborhoods vibrant and keeping them healthy and keeping them safe? Because as properties deteriorate, especially in a down economy, that's an issue.
It is. I think a couple things. One of the great challenges you have as the economy turns down, especially in a city like Worcester that saw the surge I mentioned earlier of private investment who bought many kind of multifamily properties. As we saw, as the economy turned down, maintenance generally is one of the first places these kind of owners of these properties go to kind of cut costs, whether that's a homeowner themselves or someone who owns a portfolio of properties. Clearly, maintenance becomes one of the first places to kind of pull back from. And clearly, that causes great challenges for communities like ours. Kind of, not only does it kind of cause real significant kind of code health issues, but more dramatically, I think it creates a sense of deterioration that makes it harder to kind of once again get people excited about buying and kind of living in your communities, especially try to get middle-class families excited about living in communities. A couple of things the city has done. Certainly on more significant challenge properties, we have something called a problem property review team, which is made up of different agencies, police department, health, code, our housing folks. They get together and identify really challenging properties that are actually pulling down the quality of life in a neighborhood. So you might have, some challenged neighborhoods that are already kind of on edge on that tipping point, and then 2 or 3 property owners just kind of walk away or just really doing a terrible job kind of and pulling down kind of the quality of life in that neighborhood. We have a whole team that comes in from law enforcement, from code, from our housing units to come in and try to kind of aggressively go after those property owners to get them back in. We also, as I mentioned, have a receivership program for the more significantly challenged properties, especially some of these foreclosed properties where it's very difficult to kind of work back through chains of ownership and trying to find out who's responsible. So we've had some opportunities there with our receivership team. One of the things I think is missing is more resources for folks to do kind of moderate repair programs. I think we have something called the Worcester Community Housing Resources, which is one of our CDCs has a small loan fund that does some kind of lending for homeowners to do moderate repairs. We have some small efforts on the city level to help support people to do moderate repairs. But that's where I would make a case, especially in a city like Worcester, with a lot of elderly homeowners who don't have resources now, living on very limited incomes, don't have the resources to do the maintenance. We need to have better tools out there, I think, to help folks like that so they can keep those properties in good condition. And there's certainly communities like ours need more resources to kind of address some of those challenges.
Worcester was one of the first cities in Massachusetts to embrace a program the MassHousing offers called our Purchase Rehab program. And their housing people work with us extremely well on that. They got some great staff here. But the way that works is someone can buy a home, and we'll finance not only 97% of the purchase price of that home, but we'll also finance 97% of the rehab cost in combination. One mortgage payment. And the way that it works is that 97% of the purchase price is advanced at closing, and the money that's allocated towards the rehab is put into a construction or an escrow account and then dispersed as the work is completed. The city of Worcester has rehab specialists that help with that process, In other instances, we've worked directly with lending institutions who have rehab specialists and construction departments that have worked on that. But that's another thing that realtors should be aware of, that when you're trying to stabilize a neighborhood and convert a three-family troubled property into a stable homeownership property, that a city like Worcester and MassHousing can work together to create a program to make that a reality. And with some of the sales prices and at today's interest rates, that can be a fairly significant opportunity.
Absolutely. And I know that's been very successful. I also think at the end of the day, you mentioned that there's still not enough resources. So if you look at the number of distressed properties across our city, it's fairly significant. How do we get more folks into those situations? As you mentioned, one of the things I continue to try to get my head around is we're at a really remarkable time where interest rates are significantly at record lows. And once again, the valuations have dropped significantly. And we still aren't getting quite enough people into the market. And I think part of that is a confidence issue, and part of that then maybe having more tools. You talk about the purchase and rehab, although for some people, a lot of folks, they're not quite ready to take on that kind of a project, right? So a lot of folks want to be able to come in, turn that key, and walk in the door. So how do we get more people in is, I think, one of our great challenges.
The issues that we're seeing in a lot of our large cities is one of bridging the gap between employment and the affordability. You seem to be doing a better job of that here in Worcester than a lot of communities. Can you talk a little bit about the things that you've done to spur economic growth, to create the growth in jobs, and therefore creates probably a little bit better demand for housing than we're seeing elsewhere?
Absolutely. Obviously, at the end of the day, if folks don't have meaningful employment, then they're not going to have opportunities to buy and purchase, no matter what great programs we have or how many programs we have. Worcester's been very fortunate, as I mentioned a little bit in my opening remarks, to have a fairly stable base of kind of employers. We're the region's largest provider of health care, which certainly has been very helpful. We've benefited greatly from investments from the state. We're building a new $300 million cancer research center at UMass. We'll employ 800 kind of middle-level, high-level researching positions. We've had a growth in our education sector with the Mass College of Pharmacy downtown. And then we I think, strategically used the TIF agreements, the tax increment financing opportunities, to move some very significant projects forward. Right across the street here, you'll see big cranes coming up. Our old mall, which we had an urban mall called the Worcester Galleria, is coming down. With assistance from the state and from local resources, we're actually building the first phase of what will be a $240 million commercial, residential, and a cancer center and hotel, commercial residential complex, and then a cancer center and hotel that'll be right downtown. So we're using TIF agreements to do that. And I think also the work we've done here to try to make sure that as we use the TIF tool to kind of provide opportunities and incentives for developers, we've also really focused on the idea of getting local people employed. The TIF itself and the legal kind of requirements that don't allow you to mandate local hiring, but we've been able to work with our larger kind of developers downtown here to make sure we're putting more local people to work, not just in the construction phase, but in the long-term phase. That's certainly been one of the tools we've used to put more folks to work. I also think at the end of the day, cities like, and going back to the core, cities like Worcester still, in order to kind of stay strong, need to do the 3 S's, right? Which is you got to have schools, you got to have strong public education, you have to have services, and you've got to have safety. I mean, clearly these are the critical components. I think for those folks who are real estate folks out there, everyone will tell you, what are the first 3 questions that any family asks when they're going to buy a home? They want to know what's the quality of the public education system, because a lot of them have kids, obviously. They want to know how safe is your community, right? That's a critical component. You can have great schools, but if you've got an unsafe community, no one's going to want to live there. And you've got to have a high level of public services. Clearly things like parks, playgrounds, and amenities that kind of draw people, cultural amenities. I would say that we've kind of made very smart decisions here in our community to make those kind of investments. I think those in turn, I think it really helped our city grow. We have a very strong public education system. Because at the end of the day, you can have great jobs downtown, great cultural activities, great kind of public amenities, but if you don't have great schools, right, folks can live one town out. So everyone will kind of choose to live in those surrounding rings because they take advantage of the schools. So the schools are the number one piece. The second piece is investing in public safety. And then I think kind of a lot of the services and kind of providing a better quality of life. I think that in turn has incentivized more folks to invest here. And I think you're seeing the kind of benefits of that throughout our region. We really are growing significantly. And I'd like to take all the credit for that, but I think there's a lot of different parts. I think are part of that, certainly, and predate me as well. So.
Well, you have a fantastic team. And the kinds of things that we're seeing in Worcester are going on in other cities. And MassHousing has had a great relationship with the city of New Bedford, and Mayor Scott Lang, thank you for braving the traffic and taking time out of your busy schedule to be here this morning. And you know, it's better late than never, and I really appreciate the fact that you're here today. One of the things we've been talking about is, first of all, let me introduce Mayor Scott Lang. He is a native of Oceanside, Long Island. Growing up, he held a number of blue-collar jobs, including what was my boyhood dream job of driving a beer truck. He graduated from Marquette University with a degree in history and political science. He attended Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C. while working for the Democratic National Committee. He graduated from Georgetown in 1976 and was admitted to the Massachusetts Bar in 1977. Having friends and family on the South Coast, he moved to New Bedford. And in 1970, very early in his career, he served as the assistant district attorney for John Tierney and was later appointed special assistant by district attorney Roland Pina. Mayor Lang is also a respected professional educator, lecturing in various forums on multiple aspects of labor law, including an adjunct professorship at the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth. He was elected mayor of New Bedford in 2005. He, like Mayor O'Brien, has maintained a focus of improving the quality of life for New Bedford's residents. These have centered on reducing crime, improving the quality of education, and stabilizing all the things that Mayor O'Brien just shared with us. And he has successfully worked with MassHousing in addressing special public housing issues, both on the rental as well as the homeownership side. So, again, welcome. What we've asked Mayor O'Brien to do, and we'll ask you to talk a little bit in kind of an introductory remark about what you see the challenges are from the city of New Bedford's perspective relative to housing and specifically home ownership.
When I first was elected, and I'll tell you why I was elected, and then you'll understand what I've been trying to do, but I would have looked at it much differently. You know, there would be some normal normal expectations regarding the economy. And since we've hit the recession, it's been much more difficult, and it compounded a problem in New Bedford, and that, means vacant housing and the foreclosure issues, not only in New Bedford but around the state and in the country. The reason I moved to New Bedford, as was said, in 1978, but I've been coming in and out of New Bedford since 1973. And saw it as a beautiful old New England seaport. Now, New Bedford has changed dramatically since I've lived there, since '78, and it's become much more cosmopolitan in many ways, but also has all the problems of any urban area in the United States. I mean, you name a problem Los Angeles has, New Bedford, Worcester, everyone shares the same problems. So if you realize that if we are going to make our cities vibrant and part of the solution to our economy, the solution to our educational achievement gap, the solution to tranquil neighborhoods, safe, appealing neighborhoods, then you realize it starts with the neighborhoods, it starts with housing. In New Bedford, we have around 42,000 housing units. We have a very low home ownership rate, 41%. And we have a situation where over the years we saw an influx of people from outside the city, many of whom were sent to the city because they were told, there's plenty of housing available, very inexpensive housing, and that you can get your, whatever check it is that you might be receiving in New Bedford as easy as you can anywhere else. So we had a period where we lost 20,000 smokestack jobs from about 1985 through 2000. We had a influx of individuals who came into the neighborhoods that perhaps did not have the same adherence to a hometown city as you would want. We also had a situation where we began seeing a lot of absentee landlords. We had a spike in crime, violent crime, beginning in approximately 1999 through 2000, or through 2005, which made me decide to run for mayor. Yes, I saw this old New England city turning into something that was not livable and not something that you would want to raise your kids or have your mom or dad live in or feel comfortable in. So the first thing, and I just caught the tail end of what Mayor O'Brien had said, the first thing that I focused on was public safety in every neighborhood. The idea that the crime happened across town shouldn't affect you, I don't believe in. If it happens in the city, it affects everybody. Everybody's in this together. So we worked very hard to try and build trust within the community, and we've made some very, very, I think, important strides in bringing the crime rate down, as well as bringing the violent rate down, which is something that I just could not live with. I basically left my law practice for a period of time, which means, through this term, to try and get a handle on how I could live in a city where kids were killing each other and the parents were, saying, well, I think I may know who did it, but I'm not going to tell anybody. I just couldn't live in a place like that. So first thing was public safety. Next thing was the neighborhoods, neighborhood revitalization, housing stock. And what we did when we first came in, I found that if your house was fired, if your house was the most blighted house in the neighborhood, somehow the city government was saying, well, there are 20 houses on this block, there may be 2 in bad shape, but the other 18 are fine. What I found was that all 18 suffered from the 2 that were most blighted or 1 that was fired, whatever it was. So the rule I came up with was a very, very strict housing task force that went out and basically began inspecting and putting some very strict rules in as far as neighborhood revitalization. And it was the simplest stuff. It was everything from trash to storage to to how your property was presented, combined with police action to make sure that the neighborhoods were safe. And then and then the rule of thumb that if you have a fire at your house, you have 24 hours or 48 hours rather to let us know exactly what the situation is. Otherwise, if it's a total loss or tipping point total loss, it's coming down, which means we started taking down houses that had been fired out for 10, 12 years, and started making neighborhoods feel like, gee, maybe there is some hope here. I've spent $250,000, $300,000 on a house, and 2 doors down, I've got this blighted property. Well, the blighted properties began to turn around, and then we had some questions regarding some housing. Some public housing. We had a place that from my perspective, looking at it from someone who had been in law enforcement, a killing field and a gang, basically an area for gang related activity, that it was built to rave reviews back in 1972, 73, after there were some riots in the area, and has now reached a point where it was unlivable. It was less than half full, but it was one of your typical. It went from a housing development, went from a neighborhood to a project. And that was something that, we realized had to be changed dramatically. And my response to all this, sadly, whenever anyone would sit down and say to me, well, we have this problem, what would you like to do? I'd start off by saying, well, let's knock it down. And they would look, completely shocked, and I'd say, I'm very serious. I'm not, this is not a situation where I'm willing to accept a coat of paint. I'm not willing to accept a new window. Let's knock it down, start from scratch. And I took that approach with a number of different projects in the city, that I'm not going to take less than best. I'm not going to settle. This is not a situation where I guess we get a C. This is, we're going to strive to be the best. And it drove the private market working with the public market to basically transform a number of different places that have become projects in the city to neighborhoods. So you have a place like United Front Development, which is now called Lewis Temple Homes, which is now reconnected. We reconnected streets. I looked at it. I'm not a city planner, but realized that they had built a compound, which made a lot of sense, I'm sure, in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. But in order to make it a neighborhood, you had to reconnect the streets and have people going through and have people feeling like they were part of the neighborhood, that you may live in a housing development, but the fact is you should feel every good about yours is 5 blocks away where we're living in single-family homes. And I wanted green, and I wanted a situation where people felt safe. The next thing that we did was try and forestall very, very quickly the foreclosure crises in the city and in the country. And I think that at the time, I'm sure everyone in this room had solutions to it, and I think in hindsight all the solutions were correct. And I think that's hard to say. I just didn't say in hindsight I wish. What I'm saying is the solutions that we were all crying for back then and demanding, in hindsight, were the right solutions, which would keep as many people in their homes as possible. If you had to amortize over 100 years to make sure that the amount of money that needed to be paid during this financial crisis met whatever the expectation was, if you had to guarantee them by the government, if you had to subsidize them, it was a heck of a lot better than what we've seen now, which is homes. We have about 350 in New Bedford. We insist that they're boarded up. We charge a fee, but the fact is 350 homes in New Bedford that are under foreclosure is something that erodes the entire housing stock and the value of every home. So when I say in hindsight, I'm saying we all worked very hard to try and get the federal government to address this a different way, and for whatever reason, they were unable to do so. But the key to keeping your neighborhoods intact, God bless you, is keeping people in their homes. The other thing that we worked very hard on was education, and we continue to work on it and try and decentralize the whole concept of education, try and keep the neighborhood schools intact, try and get after-school programs going, try and have the kids from 8 in the morning, 7:30 in the morning, till 5 in the afternoon. Run night programs, summer programs, things where people feel like I want to be in New Bedford. And then as a result of doing that and concentrating on that, we have been very successful with economic development. To the point now where our new growth is one of the better ones in the state. We've been able to keep. I haven't increased the levy now. This will be 2 years, and out of the 6, for 3 out of the 6, I didn't increase the levy. The idea that you march to oblivion by way of 2.5 each year isn't helpful to the people in your city who they're trying to hold on to their homes, and certainly isn't helpful to the businesses that are having a tough time during the recession. So the four legs I always looked at, and I think Mayor O'Brien exactly the same thing, is public safety, neighborhood revitalization, education, and economic development. Every one is important as the other, and every one on some days is the most important. And public safety, obviously, is why we all, band together in the very earliest existence of human beings for common safety. But the fact is that economic development will not ignite unless you have the other 3 legs strongly intact. We have increased the tax base. We've created more jobs during the recession than we lost, which means we have a net gain of about 1,000 jobs, which is the first time I think New Bedford in a recession didn't get hit first and recover last. If we end up with a double recession, then all bets are off for everybody. I can guarantee you that now. And if we end up cutting the federal government to the point where all the revenue sharing that we receive, it has to be either raised on the local level or we need it from the state, it's going to be a problem as well. But growth seems to me to be a solution to the problems of the cities. If you can get people to invest in the cities, get people to understand that you will not tolerate anything but the best in all the areas that people think are important, I think you have a chance to succeed. 2 weeks ago, we ran our first regatta. And I expected, I thought it would be a success, but we ended up having a couple of thousand people come in, about 150 boats. This was on a river when I first took office. Someone told me it was dead. What was I worried about it? And the more parking lots along it, the better, which is the Acushnet River. It's been an interesting time for New Bedford in that I think the people just decided that if we're going to live in the city of New Bedford, we ought to start out having pride in our own city, and then we'll command the respect that we deserve as we go forward. But the whole key, is the neighborhoods, and the whole key is housing. Last thing I'll say is I believe we have, working with MassHousing, we've picked up about a score of houses now, and we have put them into first home buyer programs, and they've all sold, at a fair market price, even during the recession. We have 4 mills have completely been converted from vacant mills into beautiful new housing, at a fairly high market rate ratio, which means that we ensure the future of the city. So I think the key really is working, with all your partners, both your federal, state, your private partners, certainly, in figuring out a way that you can walk up to someone and say, let me show you my city, whether it's Worcester or New Bedford. It's one of the more beautiful places, more dynamic places to live, and let me show you around. And once you turn that corner, which we do every day, I think you can, see the rejuvenation of all of our urban areas. So that's an overview, and then I'll take the seat.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that we wanted to do is to make this an engaging discussion. And we have two microphones in the audience, and I want to encourage anyone who has a question for either Mayor Lang or Mayor O'Brien to step up and ask a question. While you're gathering your courage to ask a question, I will pose this to both Mayor Lang and Mayor O'Brien. We have an audience today of principals, leaders, real estate companies, community banks, lenders, and nonprofit organizations who came here today idealistically to be part of the solution, to be part of a solution for the housing crisis, the homeownership crisis. And I'd like to ask both of you, what would you envision a best efforts collaboration to look like in your cities involving these people? Let's start with you, Mayor Lang.
Well, the people here then are the people that we have partnered with in New Bedford. The first of all, you have to have community involvement, because the best laid intentions, if you don't have it from the bottom up, don't work. And that's what I have found time and time again. Someone in the audience has to have the great idea. You go and you give it to them. It seems to me it takes a lot longer to percolate down than it will up. So we identify areas of the city that we believe are appropriate for change, investment, for redevelopment in one way or the other. So we did the first master plan in 50 years. And it shows areas of the city that need to be changed dramatically, that go back 100 years in an inappropriate use that need to be changed. You've got to have people who are willing to come in from the private sector to invest in your community. You have to have financial institutions that are willing to lend the money. You have to have a willing partner at the state level for that gap that always exists. No one ever comes into the mayor's office now and says, I've got a great deal. I've got $1 million project and I'd like to put $100,000 of my own money in it. Everybody comes in now and says, I got $1 million project, I want to put $850 or $875 or $900 grand of my own money in, but there's no way in hell I can come up with the last $100 grand. Can you help us? And that's when you realize that whether it's infrastructure improvements or whether it's trying to find a partnership with the state or federal government, it is absolutely foolhardy to let that person walk out of the mayor's office until you figured out a way to get them invested in the city. So my feeling is if it's housing, we know that we have substandard housing stock all over the state. And then we know that the energy issue makes even the best homes, if they're not energy efficient, substandard from the standpoint of carry costs over the long haul. So it seems to me there's a tremendous amount of work that can be done that also generates jobs, that then produces more tax, and at the same time hopefully produces more home buyers, more consumer type of consumption. So it seems to me you target an area of the city and you decide what should it be. We've taken on just about every area of the city. I also think it's very important that all of the city gets the same opportunities. I'll just give you one very interesting example. We've opened 50 businesses downtown during the recession. When I took office, the vacancy rate downtown was about 60%. It's now 8%. If you can build a model that people feel to be appealing, life goes on every day, regardless of the economic situation. If you get willing partners and everybody's willing to put something on the table, so I think it's a shared investment, shared risk.
Just two quick things. And I sat on. Can you hear that? Is that okay? I think so. Okay. I would just say a couple things, especially for the leaders in real estate and the community banking industry. Certainly the nonprofit folks. as well. I think Mayor Lang really hit it on the nail on the head that critical components, at least for communities like ours and many of these gateway cities, and I would say for every community across the Commonwealth, is becoming more of a voice for public education. I'm always amazed, and I mean this in a very respectful way, especially with the real estate community. I talk to lots of folks in the real estate community, property owners, and I go back to them all the time and talk about why you need to become powerful voices for public education and the schools in your community, because they're critical to the future, whether it's economic development piece, it's a public safety piece, pretty much neighborhood stability piece, almost all ties back to that public schools piece. So becoming more a voice and advocate to support efforts, especially around some of the reform work that's being done. We have 5 innovation schools here in our community, and we actually have folks who are real estate folks and banking partners that are part of that dialogue and conversation. So there's opportunities out there, even for institutions that play roles in public education. And then partnering more with our CDCs clearly has been very beneficial. But the other piece I just want to mention real quickly is the green energy piece. Our city has adopted the stretch code, and there was some concern about adopting stretch code, how that was going to impact some of the real estate market and ability of folks to kind of do renovations. And we've, as a city, taken some federal stimulus money and using that to buy down some of the costs of that. But I really see those as real opportunities, as the mayor said, both to create jobs, real concrete jobs for people in your community to work and get into this green economy through a lot of the work around weatherization and energy efficiency, number one. But I also will think in the long term, that's going to help bring down your buyers' costs as being more energy efficient properties. That's going to lower their operating kind of the needs to kind of meet the operating kind of demands of their properties. So taking full advantage of that and being part of that conversation, I think, is important as well.
Rob?
Yeah, the title of this program is The Future of Homeownership, but there is a now of homeownership. We know that Mayor Sarno right now is not here because he is addressing an Occupy Springfield protest happening right now in Springfield. Knowing that a lot of the people at that protest probably are displaced from homes, maybe displaced from homes, are facing jobs problems, a variety of other things. Obviously, their list of demands or interests are beginning to be formed. But I'm reminded of the broadcast news movie where the mantra was, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." As you think about Occupy Boston and Chicago and New York and now Springfield and possibly New Bedford and Worcester, what kinds of things have you all been thinking about in terms of addressing some of the issues that are coming up in terms of housing, jobs, all that sort of thing? And what are other things that you think should be done out there?
Do you want to go?
Sure. That's kind of a broad question. I would say a couple of things. I actually think the Occupy movement has some, I've actually enjoyed kind of watching it develop because I think it does touch into a lot of frustration that as mayors, I like to say we become generally the complaint department. That's where kind of people go when they're generally at the end of their rope and they're pretty frustrated, whether it's with government or what's going on in the economy. They come in to kind of generally talk to. I have these open office hours I do weekly, which I have folks come in and talk to me. And I do think there's some legitimate frustrations there, and I do think there were some real missed opportunities as the federal government moved forward. I worked as Congressman Jim McGovern's district director prior to becoming mayor in 06 and 07 and early 08, and really felt there were some opportunities where we could have more globally kind of helped us, a lot of folks, especially middle-class families, helping to buy down interest rates, I think would have been an opportunity to really kind of help a lot of folks who are now underwater and struggling to make those mortgage payments. So I do think there's some opportunities that were missed. I certainly feel that a lot of the movement is tapping into folks that are frustrated by this economy, have lost homes or have lost their job. And I don't think there's a lot of real clear answers there. I do think there is an important role for the state, federal, and local governments, though, to intervene here, whether that's to helping to kind of restart our housing efforts or whether that's to kind of make other investments to put people back to work. So I do think there's some legitimacy to that, and I think it's a good dialogue to have. I think so.
We had Occupy New Bedford on Saturday, and on Thursday I believe it was at UMass Dartmouth, and then it came in New Bedford on Saturday. What I indicated when they interviewed me on Friday for Saturday morning was I firmly believe in healthy democracy, and that means people getting out, assembling, debating, protesting, but it's all got to be peaceful, and as long as it remains peaceful, I think it's an appropriate exercise and demonstration. If it is not peaceful, then obviously it's a whole another ball of wax. I also think that what I said at the Occupy event on Saturday was terrific. I think this is a great expression of concern, but you better go register and vote, because otherwise it's a waste of time, and it continues to be a waste of time with people who get up there, call talk radio or come to the mayor's office, whatever, and then you find out that as a stockholder they haven't exercised their right to vote. But let's talk a minute about that whole issue of where home ownership is going to go and what happens post-recession, or will there be a post-recession if we entered a new down, This is self-imposed. I'm just going to speak real quickly about this, but the genius who decided that the United States would be the consumer nation without any jobs needs to be talked to, because what we did was we exported. In New Bedford, we lost 20,000 jobs, smokestack jobs. I can tell you about the history of New Bedford. It's very interesting. And also, by the way, most gateway cities have a very, very similar history. I went to a conference several years ago that involved the 8 richest cities in the country, and they're all little smokestack cities. New Bedford was one of them, and it was Reading, Pennsylvania. I go, what are you doing here? They said, well, when it was, the railroad days, we made every railroad engine, locomotive in the country. I mean, it was very interesting. And then there was, whether it was Deerfield or whatever it was, Dearborn outside of Detroit. But it's very interesting. The fact of the matter is, though, that we lost 20,000 jobs in New Bedford, and they weren't manufacturing 8-track tapes. They were manufacturing things that we use every day now that went offshore and are re-entered into the American economy without any tariff or duty or any penalty at all, any tax penalty. In fact, there's some tax incentives that allow companies to go offshore and build their product. Now, the whole idea of this was that if we go offshore, we're going to lift the standard of living for everyone around the world, and they're going to buy American products made here. Well, 2 problems with it. That was a load of malarkey, because they're working for, 25% less than what or 25 times less, rather, than what our workers are working for. And there's no Department of Labor or EPA or anything else that regulates in many cases. So it's just plain old-fashioned, blatant, profit motive. And to give you a very glaring example of this, New Bedford has an awful lot of diversity, a lot of communities, and we're constantly welcoming international guests in, which is a lot of fun and a whole different aspect of the mayor's office than I had realized. And I had the mayor of Buncrana, Ireland, in a couple of years ago, and a fellow came in and he was like wiping sweat off his brow, and his face was all wrinkled up. And I said, Mayor, what's wrong? What's the problem? And he said, I just got word we're going to lose 1,500, our plan of 1,500 workers, and we have that's about a third of the employment in our town. And I said, well, what do they make? He said, it doesn't matter. You wouldn't really be concerned, but they make undergarments. I said, really? Well, what kind? He said, well, T-shirts and briefs and boxers. I said, what brand? He said, Fruit of the Loom. I said, where'd they come from? He said, Indiana. I said, how long have they been there? He said, 10 years. So I said, okay, let me make sure I understand this now. So you get a company to come from the U.S., go over and build this plant for you in Buncrana. They employ 1,500 people. Why did they go? Well, we were able to produce the product in Ireland for 1/3 of the cost of what they were paying in the United States. And I said, so that's very interesting. How was your productivity? He said it was good. It was as good as the U.S. I said, that's great. I said, so why are they leaving? He said, because they're going to Morocco. I said, for what reason? He said, because they can produce it there for 1/3 of what we're producing it in Ireland. I said, well, don't worry, because what's going to happen here, before too long, it'll end up back in Indiana, and the process will start again. We'll underbid Morocco. So the point is that the Occupy Wall Street is a slogan for every the kitchen sink. It's are you a liberator or an occupier in your foreign policy? Are you creating jobs or are you exporting jobs? Do you allow, every time we deregulate, we look at something and say we went too far, whether it's communications or transportation or the banks. I mean, you got to have a blend. You can't, if you're a democracy and you're going to be stable, you got to have a blend. So here's what I think. Home ownership is a key element to America and democracy and stability. And the fact is that when we were kids, they were selling homes in the cities for $1 a home if you agreed to live there, raise a family there, and pay your taxes. And then there were programs to rehabilitate the home. Now all this foreclosed property is either going to be mine, right? It's mines, right? Copper, whatever it is, mines, or it's going to end up being drug dens or whatever, or it's going to end up being knocked down by me because I have a real compulsive need to knock anything down that makes no sense, right? To clear up ground, create pocket parks, whatever. But it's going to come. It's got to come full circle. The idea that home ownership will be dead in the United States means a nomadic type of a country. You've got to have home ownership. You've got to stabilize the housing market. You have to stabilize the prices. Guy comes into the office and two things, great things. I know the mayor hears this every day. Comes in and says, do you realize now that my home is worth 20% less than it was? So my answer is, are you selling it? The guy says, no. I said, it's not worth a dime less then, right? Number one. Number two, when you bought it, what did it cost you? Well, it cost me $100,000. And during the days that housing was a great investment, it went up to, say, to $200,000. So now it's worth $160,000. Let's not spend a lot of time talking about this. This is cyclical. That's like saying my stock lost money. Did you sell it? No. Well, then wait it out. Let's see where it goes. Have some faith, right? And what are you going to do? You're going to sell your house and live in the street and sell your house for less money than you may be in right now? The other thing, though, is my house is worth 20% less and my taxes don't go down. What happens is if my house is worth more, my tax rate goes down. My house is worth less, my tax rate goes up, but my taxes are stable. They are static. And the answer to that is because you also work for the city. And I don't remember you coming in and saying you'll take 20% less for your wages or 20% less on your health insurance or whatever. It costs a certain amount of money to keep a stable city. The housing market will rise again. But the key is if we lose track of the idea that home ownership is really, you say anything about the American dream, I don't think my kids are going to have a better life than me or whatever it is. But if we lose sight of the fact that a home is, shelter, safety and shelter, the two key elements, clothing, food, but shelter. If we lose sight, if you have someone who lives in that home, your neighborhood's much different than someone who's in there for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years. Home ownership is one of the ways we'll recover. And these foreclosed properties that have been written down, the government now should go to every owner of a foreclosed property and say, we want some sort of reintegration system where we can start putting these homes back into normal use within our cities and towns. And if it doesn't happen soon, some of these will be, then you'll end up saying, hey, get Scott over here to knock these things down because you won't be able to save them. But home ownership is crucial to the recovery of the country.
We're running a little short on time, and I want to make sure that we do entertain all the questions. And Joe, I want you to answer this one.
Well, it's really for both mayors, if I may. My name's Paul Yorkis, and I have I am a member of the Massachusetts Association of Realtors Government Affairs Committee. And one of the things that we have proposed is a program by which communities like both of yours would be in a position to list properties with realtors to get them on the market so that they could be offered quickly and to a much wider group of potential buyers without going through the current process. And I would just like to know whether that kind of legislation, if adopted by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, would help your two cities get more properties that you may own back into circulation and perhaps prevent more homes being knocked down in the city of New Bedford.
I didn't quite follow the mechanism, though. I guess you're saying that properties that are foreclosed are ones that the city takes through through the tax title process?
Yeah. Right now, if I understand it correctly, if a city takes a property through tax title, you have a bidding process that you have to engage in. It's time-consuming, laborious, and bureaucratic, and in fact, can exacerbate the problem by keeping that home off the market and prevent it from being reintegrated back in the community. Would a legislation like this be good for the cities and be something you'd embrace?
It sounds like, at least on the surface, it would be. I do think that there's challenges as cities kind of, we actually try to, as much as possible, not necessarily take that title and try to figure out ways to kind of move that in different directions, negotiating with banks or with the lenders to try to kind of prevent having to take that additional title process. It's a very lengthy process and certainly one that is costly as well. And as you mentioned, kind of generally properties deteriorate over that time lag. Anything that can expedite that would certainly be worth looking at. Clearly want to make, as much as possible, move properties back into kind of positive reuse as quickly as possible, because as the mayor mentioned, that it actually doesn't take a lot of properties to bring down kind of the quality of life and the conditions in a neighborhood. It actually can be generally one or two, and that's why communities like ours and the mayors here have kind of tried to move very quickly to kind of at least secure kind of problem properties and try to aggressively go after owners before it actually gets to that point. So.
Scott, isn't there a program in Baltimore that you've been looking at that you're trying to emulate, similar to what?
The legislation that we're talking about is modeled after the successful program in Baltimore.
What the mayor said as far as us getting appropriate title is important. But let me explain real quickly what happens when we get appropriate title. We either put it out to an auction, or which is very uncertain, or we go out with an RFP, which is very tedious. So if we're able to take properties and put them into the private sector's hand from the standpoint of real estate brokers to show and attempt to sell, with some conditions on them, I think it would be very helpful. And I know I've looked at the Baltimore statute and how it works, and it has worked very well. So I do support it. There are some properties, though, that absolutely, as the mayor said, you have to say, this is an anchor property, here's what we're looking for, we're going to do an RFP, we're going to put some real strings to it. The other thing that I should say for both of us, which is very important, is we don't take knocking a house down lightly if it's a historic house, if it's a house that can be rehabilitated. We look at that as a place where people can go back to work. But when we look at a piece of property and we realize that this is devaluing and bringing down the resurrection of this neighborhood, then we have in New Bedford, and I'm sure around the state now, people are moving very quickly. The idea that I'd buy a house for 5-6 years and see the same boarded up windows and no roof on it just reached the point where I couldn't take it anymore. So I do support that legislation, but it has its time and place also. I mean, there's some, we get a hold of the Armory. I'm probably not going to put that out to the private sector unless I have a real strong partnership through an RFP. But I do think it'd move property. Right now, we have about 150 pieces of property that we own. Some of it are butter-type programs, but 150 pieces of property, I would say 100 of them that I'd like to sell tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
One last question. That's all we have time for, unfortunately.
Thank you. Tom Schofer, Cape and Islands, and MAR Government Affairs. I'm a historic preservationist as well as a realtor, and I want to ask them a comment and then ask the mayors a quick question in regarding to that. What we are calling the copper pipes theft bill, as I'm sure you're all keenly and sorely aware of. I do preservation on the Cape and in Springfield, so I was hoping to see Mayor Sarno and ask him a few questions. However, I just wanted to quickly say that everything from Springfield to Seattle to Truro out on the Cape has had houses, copper pipe and other metals theft happening. So it's happening in every community across the state and the country. In Seattle, they're taking literally drain holes out of the streets. Would you support a copper pipe theft bill? And we're seeking perhaps to call it a metals theft bill. And as a historic preservationist, I find this is a sort of a cultural architectural genocide where perfectly good homes, including one next to mine in Springfield, had the copper pipe, the metals theft. It caused a 21E environmental nightmare as well. At that point, the properties start getting infested with vermin, the whole block goes. So it does have the snowball effect. And it's something that we can't replace. Massachusetts has such a wonderful history. So I ask, would you support a strong metals pipe theft bill? Thank you.
All right, so the answer is yes. The answer also is that receiving stolen property is on the books right now. And because you're a metal scrap dealer, and you say, gee, I didn't realize that a guy walking in with a shopping cart full of full of metal and a hacksaw in his back pocket, I didn't realize it was stolen, is a disgrace. The answer is that there's got to be extremely strong penalties on this. Otherwise, they're mining their way through the neighborhoods. The other thing, though, that I'll just mention, which is driving us all nuts, is so that's malicious destruction and theft, breaking and entering, the whole ball of wax. It has to be treated in that way, and that should be something people should enjoy in their own mind, thinking about how much the bars are worth in any jail cell that they end up being in. I mean, this is degradation of society. Graffiti's the same thing. Now, the graffiti to a different level, obviously. But the graffiti is unbelievable. We spend more time picking up people's trash that they throw out carelessly, graffiti, copper mining, than you can possibly imagine. And if we took a real strong stand on it and said, hey, it's personal property, and this is going to be punished to the fullest extent of the law, I think some of it would, I think there is a deterrent to it, and I also think some of the people, would be out of society for a while anyhow. It's not the same as guns, but it certainly is something that is part of that list of things that what's an urban problem.
I just have to agree real quickly with that. I mean, it's gotten so bad in my city. We've actually had instances where we've had elderly folks actually living in a house where people have broken in actually in an occupied home. This used to just be a problem in vacant homes or homes in transition, literally breaking into people's homes in the middle of the night to take the copper out of their basement. I mean, just mind-boggling. And I think the point the mayor makes, first of all, they're taking this more seriously, but also aggressively going after folks who actually are purchasing this, I think, is the critical component. The reality is a lot of folks that are involved in this trade are folks that are struggling with issues of addiction and others. It's going to be, you got a lot of folks who are cycling through the criminal justice system, kind of ending the opportunities for them to sell that. Many of these folks aren't that mobile. Is going to be a critical component of that as well. More significant penalties. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And it really does become problematic because these transitional properties or vacant properties that have opportunities, foreclosed properties, ones we got in the receiver process, who then have their pipes cut and they have flooding and the house is ruined, right? We really, it's kind of caused some real significant issues.
Thank you, mayors. Let's turn this into law.
Mayor Lang and Mayor O'Brien, I want to thank you very, very, very much for being here today. Housing and home ownership, we agree with you, are critical to the stability of our cities. MassHousing, the Massachusetts Association of Realtors, the groups of nonprofits that are here, are pledged to work with you in your communities to whatever degree you need us. We are there for you. We hope that you will call on us and allow us to help support all of the efforts that you articulated so well this morning. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you.